welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today, we welcome back on the show Tracy Asamoah. She is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, How Shame Tried to Hijack My Medical Training. Tracy, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm happy to be back.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but for those who didn't get a chance to listen to our first episode together, can you just share your story and journey to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I'm also a physician coach, and I focus on supporting women physicians going through career transitions, life transitions to help them be able to design the life they want to have going forward and design an action plan to get there. I'm also a child psychiatrist, and I have a small private practice here in Austin, Texas.
And we are speaking towards the end of August. And by this time this episode comes out, we'll be in the midst of the fall school season. So we are 18, 19 months in the midst of the pandemic. So from your perspective as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, what are some common issues that you're seeing in the people that you're seeing? And what's some advice that you have for parents in this upcoming school year?
Yeah, it's really interesting because obviously over the last 18 months, what I've been seeing has shifted quite a bit. At the beginning of the pandemic, it was a lot of dealing with big changes and uncertainty and stressful situations and all of the changes of not being able to do what teens and kids do developmentally. That wasn't really happening when they weren't seeing their friends and in those environments that support their development. It's shifting now. Kids are going back to school, and some are ready for it. They want to be there. They're excited to be with their peers and to get back into what feels like a normal routine. Some are struggling. A lot of kids have not left the house very much in the past 18 months, certainly haven't been on a school campus, and returning to that from a period of being relatively isolated to kind of full swing and having to not just get back into school and what school brings with academics and teachers, but also dealing with just the social issues that come up during that developmental period. And then on top of that, a lot of my kids that I work with deal with anxiety, depression, ADHD, autism spectrum disorders. And so all of that is now kind of culminating in, front stage right now. And I'm seeing a lot of kids kind of navigating that, some struggling with getting all of that kind of back into full swing again. And so the next couple of months will be kind of, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. On top of all that, kids are worried about the pandemic too. They see their parents stressed. They understand something about what all of this means, depending on how old they are. For the ones that don't, they often see their family stressed. They see adults fighting, arguing, uncertainty about what to do. And they're also taking that into their school days and into the classrooms. And so teachers certainly have their hands full, helping support the students and trying to really bring education to where we want it to be, but knowing that there's a lot of other factors that are mixing in and impacting how kids are able to learn and adjust to their school day.
So from a behavioral health standpoint, any tips and advice for parents whose children may have to reacclimate back to a social setting again?
Absolutely. One of the big things is really being able to be open and receptive and listening to whatever your kids bring to you. If they're bringing things that they're worried about or stressed about or uncertain about, just being able to listen and kind of hold the space with them is really important. We as parents really don't understand what our kids are going through. None of us had to go through school in this way. And so while we know our kids really well, we often understand our kids really well, we don't quite know what this experience might be like for them. And it can change day to day. Certainly their emotions and their moods can change day to day. So just being a place where they can just really express themselves, talk about what they're feeling, and being able to listen and maybe not always judge and try to have the answer, but just being there to listen will be really important. Also being very clear about what your expectations of your kids are. And so, we do want our kids to learn, and we do want our kids to get an education, and we do want our kids to be able to focus on that, and really letting our kids know that this is why we're doing all of this, that we want our kids to have an opportunity to have an education, and that we'll figure this out. We'll work through it. It might be tough, it might be difficult, but we will be able to figure this out. And just reassuring them that the whole purpose is for them to be able to have as much normalcy as possible, to be able to go to school if that's safe to do so in a safe way, for them to be around other kids, because it is really important for kids to be around kids. Mm-hmm. And so just having kids understand these really basic things, and then let your kids get home and relax. Please let kids just get home and decompress and unwind, even if they have homework or activities. Having a chance to come home and just, especially those kids who haven't been around a lot of the stimulation for a long time, to just be able to allow the day to kind of dissipate and melt a little bit is really important for a lot of kids. And so if your kids don't want to come home, talk about their day, tell you everything that happened, jump into their homework, that's fine. Give them some time, mm-hmm. let them get their headspace straight, and then they can step into whatever the evening needs to look like for them.
All right, let's transition now into your Kevin MD article that you wrote. It's
Absolutely.
titled, How Shame Tried to Hijack My Medical Training. Now, for those who didn't get a chance to read that article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Yeah, well, I'll say why I write it. I decided to write it. I wrote it because I realized, not until after having started partnering with women, coaching around all sorts of issues that come up as being physicians, and especially women physicians and physicians of color, I really started to understand that shame and my experience with shame at different points, not just during training, but things that I experienced during childhood, really impacted how I was showing up as a physician. And I was also seeing it in how the women that I partnered with were showing up, and understood that recovering from shame and what that showed up as really was an important part of the journey of becoming a different type of person in who I was, who the women that I partner with are, both as physicians, but also in their relationships, in their time by themselves. And so I really wanted to take an opportunity to kind of step back and share what I experienced, and why I thought it was so important for all of us to be able to bring this out into the open, take off the covers, and not allow shame to take center stage in how we move through the world. In training, the one episode that has always stood out was, I was a brand new psychiatry intern, and I was doing my first shift, admitting patients from the ER onto the inpatient unit. And was really just I was excited and I was happy and I felt good about where I was, but I was also overwhelmed. It was a busy night in the ER. There was a lot going on. I didn't know how things worked at that point. I was there with my senior resident, and a lot of patients were there for psychiatric evaluations. And so he gave me one to go see. And this patient was just a complicated patient. This patient had been diagnosed with AIDS and had also had a history of some different psychological issues, and was coming in with a very bizarre presentation. And I just didn't quite know what to make of him, but I did my best and got him admitted. He had already been seen by the ER team. I evaluated him, presented him to my resident, thought I came up with a pretty good plan to get him admitted and assessed and treated on the unit. And the next day, my resident told me that after he had taken another look at the patient, that he had sent the patient for some imaging, which I had not done. And the patient had a finding on an MRI that explained a lot of his symptoms. Mm-hmm. And the way it was presented to me was basically I'd screwed up. I had missed something big. It could have turned out really horrifically if he hadn't caught it, that I needed to be more careful. What didn't happen was any teaching around what I had seen or how I could have caught it, or the fact that, hey, you're here to learn. This was a big deal, but what can you learn from this? How is this not going to happen again? Let's talk about what you need to look for. We all make mistakes. Don't don't let this get to you. It's, you're going to make mistakes, but you want to learn from them. That's where the focus should have been. But it really is, the focus was at that time in me feeling bad about missing something that I should have caught. And whether or not I should have caught it, I don't think was the point. I mean, it was my first day as an intern seeing patients. And so, I was focused on just making sure that I covered all the things that I needed to cover and doing the assessment in the ER, and maybe not quite so good yet at catching the things that were a little bit more like the unicorns or the zebras in the room. I was looking for the horses, not the zebras. And so it could have been a great learning opportunity. Maybe I would have become super interested in working with that particular group of patients, because I actually found him really interesting when I evaluated him, but it actually created a lot of fear and anxiety in assessing patients in the ER that followed me through a lot of my training, because I thought I was always going to miss something really important if I didn't kind of overdo it. And it fed into the tendency that a lot of us have of being perfectionistic and maybe doing things that aren't quite so necessary, but because we're so worried about what happens if we don't do all the things. And so that's why I wrote it. I wrote it because I really had not reflected on the meaning behind that until recently, until I started seeing shame in a lot of the clients that I partner with. And I reflected back on some of my past experience and realized, wow, that has sat with me all these years. And I never really peeled it apart and looked at it and dug in there. And I had never really even given myself a break around it. I kind of always felt like I had really screwed up, and that was a shadow that has lived with me through all of my career, through all of the other things that I've done that have been fabulous and things that I've done that have been screw ups. That has always sat there. And so I really wanted to pull that out so other people could say, hey, yeah, I get it. I've been there. And, yeah, maybe I need to forgive myself about something too. Maybe I need to understand how shame is showing up so I can maybe show up a little bit differently going forward.
So you mentioned that episode that of shame lasted for a while after that particular episode. Was there anything specific that happened that helped you recognize it for what it was and helped you overcome it?
Yeah. I mean, I think what helped me recognize it for what it was some of my own coaching and really starting to understand where some of my roadblocks and some of the things that were getting in my way of really showing up as I wanted to as a physician, and saying, wow, shame is there, like there's something there. And then just getting curious about what were some of the more memorable experiences in my training and my education, and how had they impacted me. And that one has always stood out. It stood out because it was so early in my training, because the way that attention was brought to it felt so harsh at the time, and kind of so unforgiving. And it set up an early expectation that I should have walked into training having it all figured out. I should have walked into training as a psychiatrist, ready to see patients, even though I was there to learn. My training was 5 years with residency and fellowship. I had lots of time to figure things out. The purpose of having teams in training is because not only are you there to learn, but there's backup, because of course you're not expecting the people in July who just got there to know it all. But in my head and through the rest of my training was, no, you are supposed to know it all. Or if you see it for the first time one day, you better have it all figured out by the time you show up in rounds the next day. And so it set up this really unrealistic expectation in my head that I wasn't allowed to make mistakes, that I wasn't allowed to not know things or to miss things. And that was something that I carried through a lot of my career. It was, it's been well into me practicing now for a couple of decades as a psychiatrist independently, to just be open to the fact that, sometimes I might have to look something up. I might actually miss things, things may not go the way I had intended them to go. And that is absolutely part of evolving as a physician through our entire life cycle practicing medicine.
Now, for those physician clients who come to you with similar episodes of shame, what kind of advice do you give to them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that we always look at is, what did it do to protect you when it first showed up? Because there's
Mhm.
always a reason that we develop these patterns of behaviors and these ways of thinking. Even if those patterns no longer serve us, there was something very important that it did. For me, during training, I was at a program that did really focus on um, being being really productive and performance and how well you did and how much you knew. And so in that program, fitting in and feeling like I was doing was what was expected of me meant that I would live up to my own expectations of what perfection and what having everything figured out looked like. And so I think it was protective back then because it pushed me and I felt that I needed to push myself so I could keep going and keep doing all those things that the other people, the
Mhm.
program, everyone who was kind of responsible for bringing me up in medicine expected of me. But what I do with clients is say, okay, so yeah, it really it had a purpose. We have to honor what that is and what that was. And now we have to understand if it's still serving you or is it now becoming a barrier to you being able to do what you really want to do. And so when my clients are able to see how the shift has occurred and how it's a barrier, then we can start pulling it apart and finding other ways of doing the things that allow us to feel like we're working and performing with excellence and meaning and joy and fulfillment in a way that shame doesn't allow us to do.
We're talking to Tracy Asamoah. She is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, How Shame Tried to Hijack My Medical Training. Tracy, this episode clearly lasted with you for a long time. And now that you have the perspective of being an attending, what kind of advice do you give to other attendings when they're trying to mentor and
Mm-hmm.
teach and educate residents? And just speak about how your words can have such an effect on the people that you train.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the main things is I think we need to acknowledge mistakes or learning opportunities much differently. I do think they need to be addressed and they need to be brought out in the open, but from a standpoint of learning, and from a standpoint of, okay, so this was the outcome of the decisions that you made. What might have happened if you had a different set of knowledge, if you had if you had judged the situation differently, what can look different, what's going to be different next time. So bringing the focus back to learning, really bringing the concept of having a growth mindset in medicine, and again through the entire life cycle of our careers. I remember when I was studying for the boards, and I don't remember which attendings told me this, but they said, if you're ever in a board situation, oral boards for the boards I was preparing for, and
Hmm.
they ask you a question and you don't know the answer, you have to tell them that you know how to get the answer.
Hmm.
I know where to look it up. I know where to find it. I have resources. And that's a mindset that we should carry. We are going to be learning and understanding through our entire careers. That concept needs to start in training. And I think that attendings who are mentoring, trainees, residents, fellows, need to also be very open and transparent about their own experiences with adverse outcomes or mistakes or judgments or decisions that they wish they would have had done differently, and then model a way of in a healthy way navigating those choices or those mistakes. And so even as trainees and students are going through their own decisions and experiencing negative outcomes, they can understand that there is a way that they can hold that experience, grow from it. You're going to feel bad about it. Nobody wants to have a bad outcome from their patients. Nobody wants to hurt their patients. We want our patients to do well. We want to always make the right decision, but we won't. And so when we are mentoring and raising up the generation behind us, we need to have them understand, how do you navigate those waters in a healthy way and in a way that in the end is going to help you and your patients down the road. And that needs to be modeled and really directly modeled. And we need to have that idea of a growth mindset be at the foundation of how we educate in medicine.
And my final question, what's your take home message you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
Yeah, my take home message is that, to some degree, so many of us carry these scars from our education and training, whether it be shame or other things that really can impact how we show up as physicians and whatever we do kind of in our current day, our current lives, our current professional lives, and that we can be kind to our past selves and try to see what the lesson can be even now from those. How can we start to shed some of those barriers that come up from those things that scarred us, and move forward in ways that really help us shine and really practice and live with joy and meaning and purpose.
Tracy, thank you again for coming back on the show, sharing your time and insight, and thanks again for your time.
Thanks, Kevin, for having me.